Hey all, welcome to ReWild Long Island's yet another webinar. We are today happy to have with us Michael Bottini. He's going to talk about knowing your Long Island mammals. Mike is a wildlife biologist who works with the Seatuck Environmental Association on Long Island. He studies river otters, spotted turtles, eastern coyotes. He monitors bald eagle nests, and he's done a lot of previous research, including elk, while a graduate student, piping plovers, and so on. So we are excited to have Mike with us today to talk about the Long Island Terrestrial Mammal Survey. Hold your questions. You can put them in chat or hold them. We will have a conversation once Mike is done with his slides, and you can ask him about those mysterious mammals in your backyard. So thank you, Mike. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, this is a new campaign that I've been wanting to do for a number of years now. And we learned that the state, New York State DEC and Natural Heritage and a couple other big organizations were embarking on a statewide mammal survey, the first one ever done by the state, actually. And so that was an impetus for us to jump on board and get involved in this. And I just, my first slide here is a really cool animal that most, even serious naturalists, have never seen. This is one of our fossorial species, so they live underground most of the time. Fascinating animal. It echolocates because it's underground in tunnels, uses mole tunnels, and also can make its own tunnels. But the last survey done for Long Island mammals was done by Paul Connor. He published a really cool booklet in 1971 called The Mammals of Long Island, New York. It's got some great information in it. It is 60 years out of date, and I'll talk a little bit about his methodology. But he, at that time, he mentions under the section about the masked shrew that it's possibly the most numerous mammal on Long Island. It's also our smallest mammal. And a couple of interesting things about it. The fact that it has a heart rate that is over 1,000 beats, up to 1,500 beats per minute, which is astonishing. And as I said, it can echolocate to find food underground. So moving along. Okay. For some reason, I'm not able to advance. Oh, let me try this here. There we go. So again, this is the publication. Now you can download this on the Seatuck website. It's such a great resource that we made it into a PDF file that you can download. And it's got little sections on each of the mammals that are found on Long Island, including the bats and including the marine mammals. So the project that we're launching, it's a 3-year project. We started in November of 2022. Is really a focus on the terrestrial and semi-aquatic. So terrestrial mammals, and then they're really just 2 semi-aquatic mammals. That would be the mink, which is mostly terrestrial, and the river otter, which we have been working on since 2008. So this booklet is the latest information we have, and although it was published in 1971, the field work that was done was in the 1960s, the early 1960s. And the other thing about this resource is that the field surveys actually focused on small mammals, so that's shrew to squirrel size, and they were mostly done in Suffolk County. The other mammals, the larger mammals, he gathered information by interviewing other naturalists. All good stuff, but it's time for an update on that. And as I mentioned, the New York State DEC and New York National Heritage Program, and in affiliation with a college up in Syracuse, ESF, SUNY ESF. They just launched this project, so we dovetailed onto that. And why would it's a big effort. It's a lot of work, and it's a several-year project, as I mentioned. So this is really key because the state manages our wildlife resources. And without knowing the distribution and relative abundance of some of these animals, you really can't do a good job of managing them. Also, with climate change, it's good to get some baseline information on the ranges of some of these animals in the state. And the last thing they mentioned, learning more about the natural history and habitat requirements of our wild mammals. I would rephrase that a little bit. So to me, this is a really great opportunity to get citizen scientists. So this is, people that, and my focus is on Long Island, to get them involved in a conservation project. So they have some ownership in that. And I found that when I started doing the Long Island River Otter project, for example, I launched that in 2008, there were a lot of people that are not wildlife biologists. They're not natural resource managers. They don't really have a background in that. They have other careers, but they're very knowledgeable about botany, or they have real strong interest, and they have a lot of knowledge about birds. And some of those people contacted me when they found out I was doing a river otter survey for Long Island, and they had amazing detailed information in their journals. They kept journals, they had photographs, could be a roadkill or something. They were super helpful. And that's a great resource that we could tap into with any of these big conservation projects. We also used a lot of citizen scientists for the bat surveys for Long Island. And I should mention that just this year, I learned that I was involved in recruiting people for the bat surveys, working with New York State DEC, that's the Department of Environmental Conservation. They lent us these devices that you put on the roof of the car, and you drove around at night, and it recorded the clicks, the echolocation clicks of the various bat species, and they can identify, replaying those audios. It's actually a pictogram, technically. They could identify what species of bat was in the neighborhood flying around when you're driving around in your car with the thing on the roof. Now they have an app that you can get for your cell phone, and just walk through the woods at night and hold it up on one of those cell phone telescoping wands, and do like a half an hour hike in a certain area, and then download all the information you got. And there's a woman doing this up on the North Fork. She's with the North Fork Audubon Society, and she has documented 11 different species, including an endangered bat species up in this area by Seatuck Inlet. So yeah, pretty cool. So we might expand this project to include the bats as well. So let's see. Yeah. And then, why not just let this dream team, this is sort of the A team. Why not let them just do all the work and, we'll see something else. Well, I had a few disappointments. And I think some people feel that Long Island doesn't always get the A team involved in their projects here. So, we're very, very fragmented, very, very developed landscape. And sometimes Albany doesn't really give us the attention that some of us feel we deserve. We have a lot of biodiversity here on Long Island. We're at the northern limits of a lot of species, flora and fauna, and we're at the southern limits of a lot of other species. So we're at this boundary line, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff here. So back in, I can't remember the date, but it was probably close to 10 years ago. Probably 12 years ago. So John Turner, who many of you may know, he's a colleague of mine at Seatuck and a very good friend for many years. And Tim Green, who's an ecologist at Brookhaven National Lab. We got together and someone had found a road-killed gray fox. And we thought the gray fox had been extirpated from Long Island. We were shocked to see it still around. And this was the dominant fox on Long Island many years ago, before European settlement, and with changes, clearing the forest land and creating agricultural land. The red fox, a more northern species, the red fox, kind of usurped it. The gray fox is a more southern species. Wow, we were like, holy smokes. We better lobby the DEC to take that off the allowable hunting and trapping regulations for Long Island. So we petitioned the Region 1 director, who at the time was Peter Scully. He listened to our argument. He said, yeah, I see what you're saying. And he then sent a request up to Albany, and it was denied, which kind of shocked us. But what we did get out of them was that they would do a 5-year study to determine the current distribution of mammals on Long Island that are allowed to be hunted and trapped, and get some data so that they could then adjust the regs. Kind of backwards in my mind. First, you want to take those things off if you don't know anything about their abundance and distribution. So it wasn't just the gray fox; it was also mink and long-tailed weasel and skunk. Those were all on the trapping list, and we felt really couldn't justify that professionally. I'll talk about it a little bit about that later. But the other thing that happened that was a little disconcerting was, so I had been doing, I did the initial survey for Long Island of river otters. So they were extirpated probably by the late 1700s. Beaver and otter were the kind of gold standard for the fur trade era. They were very valuable furs. And back then there were no conservation laws. So they were both wiped out of huge areas of North America, not just Long Island. So the river otter was reintroduced. The river otter actually did survive in a small section of the Adirondack Park. There were still some otters in New York State up in the Adirondack Park in 1900. And in 1930, they put a ban on trapping to let them expand their distribution in New York State. Well, by 1990, so that's not quite, it's like what's that, 60 years later, after the prohibition of hunting and trapping, they still hadn't colonized the western half of the state. And in 1995, the DEC started trapping them from up in, say, in the Adirondacks and the Hudson River watershed and releasing them in the western part of the state to help them out with their slow recolonization. But we didn't have any information about them on Long Island. So I launched a survey in 2008. The DEC started their own survey in 2017. This is the DEC's results here. In 2017, and the other thing is the DEC staff in Region 1 had my report. I think I had something like 20 something watersheds that I found them in, and 27 latrines. So they sent a team down here, and they didn't do a very good job of finding otter sign, and they found 6 latrines and 6 sub-watersheds on Long Island. Now, unbeknownst to me, I did find out that they were doing this, and I met some of the techs out in the field. But it's well known in the literature where to look for otters, when to look for otters, and what to look for. And it's called an otter latrine survey or an otter scent station. That's the other phrase they used. And they weren't used, they were doing this random survey. And so this is not good information. It's really not accurate. And this was over 2 years with a number of staff, as opposed to my survey, which was myself, basically, although I did have a lot of volunteers that helped me out. So that was another reason why I didn't feel comfortable leaving it up to DEC to do a mammal survey without any input from other conservation groups. So this is an example of what they did with the river otter survey. On the left here is a map of Northwest Creek in East Hampton. Now, if you want to find river otter sign, you go to where the brackish water, the tidal water, meets a dam, and there's a freshwater pond. On that dam, on that dike, is going to be, that's where the otters will leave their sign. You could go there any day between November and late April, early May, and find otter sign. The DEC drove into Barcelona State Park, got out of the car, walked over to the edge of the forest, and looked around along the edge of the salt marsh. Now, that is not where otters will set up a scent station. They are within 15 feet of swimmable water. This is like 200 or 300 yards from swimmable water. And it's not like they found an easy way to go in. There's a road that comes right in here, comes right in, right up to the dam. You get out of your car and you walk 100 feet, and there's the otter latrine. So on the right is the actual blow up of that freshwater pond. This yellow line is the dike. This is a man-made pond. There's a lot of those on Long Island. And the dredge spoil was used to make a berm. And there's a little outlet right here that flows into the creek. There it is right there. Flows into the tidal creek. Yeah, that was there. And there were many instances of this where they were in the general area, but they didn't look at the spot where the otters would be. So I finished the survey in 2018, and I found 76. The number of latrines isn't key. It's the number of watersheds that they've established a home range in. And you could see what I wanted to do was look at, compare 2008, where they had a foothold on the North Shore of Long Island, mostly in Oyster Bay and the Nisququag River. There was also a cluster in the Greenport area, Shelter Island, and the Northwest area, that Northwest Creek that I just described in East Hampton. And their home ranges are quite big. So that could have been one otter that lived in that area. I set up trail cameras for a year, and that's got a date and a time stamped on it. And all my photos of otters, I couldn't say, they were all single otters on the east end. I couldn't say that there was more than one otter based on the date and the time. So I got photos up in Greenport. A week later, I'd get photos in Mishomick, and a couple days later, I get photos in Northwest area of East Hampton, but I never got an overlap in any of those spots. Whereas in the Nissaquag River and Oyster Bay area, I got a number of photos with as many as 3 otters in one image, so that looked good. Though then in 2018, I found them all along the North Shore, all the way to Orient, in the Long Pond Greenbelt, Sag Harbor, and in the Peconic River system. So they definitely expanded. And then since then, since 2018, we've documented them in the Connecticut River. We've documented them in Wertheim Preserve. So there's now 4 to 5 sites or sub watersheds on the South Shore, right in this area here, where we've documented otters with established home ranges. They're not territorial, by the way. They're very sociable, and the males will get together in groups, fairly large groups, and they do cooperative hunting. So they'll chase a school of fish into shallow water where they're more easily caught. Kind of interesting. Yeah, fascinating animal. I've really enjoyed studying them. So that's my little pitch on, why, I wanted to get conservation groups on Long Island involved in this mammal survey to make sure we get a good quality data set while we're doing this. And we're working with the DC. There's I'm sort of, might sound like I'm bad mouthing them, but there's a lot of really good people in the DEC, and really fun to work with. Been very knowledgeable people. This is hard to read, but this is the DEC hunting and trapping regulations for the state. And you notice, say this first one here, it's raccoon, red fox, gray fox, skunk, coyote, opossum, and weasel trapping. You notice that the state is broken up into these small wildlife management unit areas. And the whole idea of a professional natural resource management agency that's in charge of wildlife resources is you want to set your hunting and trapping regulations. You want to set the time so that it doesn't coincide with killing, for example, females that are getting ready to have young, or females that just had young and they're not weaned. You take the natural history of the animal into account, and also, can it sustain hunting and trapping? So, for example, many years ago in the 1800s, we had 1700s and 1800s. Long Island had a bounty on the bobcat, and we wiped the bobcat out. We don't have bobcat trapping on Long Island because we don't have any bobcats. But I've underlined some species like the gray fox, as I mentioned earlier. There's no justification for a trapping season. There might be a few, but it's not a robust population that can handle trapping. Ditto for mink. When I got here in 1988 at a graduate school, there's a lot of mink around here. I'm pretty good at finding wildlife sign when I'm out in the field, and I have found mink sign, but it's very rare. We don't have a beaver trapping season on Long Island because there's no beaver. Unfortunately, we don't have a river otter trapping, even though we do have river otters, but they're still not well distributed across all the available habitat on Long Island. So they need a break. Yeah, and our weasel species is the long-tailed weasel. That's also very rare on Long Island. So we want to have a closer look at that and get those regs changed. The reason that I was given, myself, John Turner, and Tim Green from Albany, was that they were not going to change the regs because there's not that many trappers on Long Island. That's not the way a professional manages the wildlife resources. You don't take that into account. It's supposed to reflect the resource, period. So, finish up the bad story about the gray fox. Very cool animal. This is a photo of a gray fox, and it's more cat-like than the red fox. It's stockier. It has shorter legs, and it has this black stripe and a black tip tail. That's a key feature. A lot of red foxes, from a certain angle, they do have a lot of gray in the middle part of the body. I'll go over a couple key features there. But, we don't know they distribute. We don't know if there's a breeding population. And as Connor points out, we're an island with a huge metropolitan urban area at the closest point to the mainland. So if you extirpate because you've mismanaged some of these species, they're going to have a really hard time making it back here on their own. Unlike a lot of places on the mainland, where bobcat have come back, fisher have come back, a lot of fur bearers, black bear have come back in New Jersey, in Westchester, and Connecticut. That's going to be a little trickier getting onto Long Island. So, another little bad story about the gray fox is that once we found that, I think it was 2005, we found roadkill gray fox in the Manorville area, and the ecologists at Brookhaven National Lab, which is very close to Manorville, started setting up cameras, and they actually documented a pair of gray foxes on the edge of the B&L property in 2007. Photo on the right is a gray fox taken by Jennifer Higbee, was manning the trail cams at that time. So Jennifer said to Tim Green, well, why don't I get my trapping license, and we could live trap a couple of these and put radio collars on them. Seemed to be a breeding pair. And we could track their movements and get an idea of, how they move around in this. And this is in the Central Pine Barrens. So the instructor for the trapping certification course found out why she was taking the course, and then he went out and trapped the gray foxes, the only gray foxes that we knew of on Long Island. Not a good ending. This is a mink. So this is, again, a semi-aquatic mammal. It spends a lot of time, not as much time in the water as the river otter. It's in that mustelid group that's related to the river otter. It's much smaller. And it hunts around in the shallow water for like crayfish, frogs, and small fish. But it spends a lot of time hunting on land, just like a long-tailed weasel. It's very dark like this. Okay, so this is our iNaturalist site. So the Long Island Mammal Survey has a dedicated iNaturalist site, and I just took this screenshot of the east end of Long Island to include a part of Long Island, a part of Suffolk County, a part of Southold Town that we often forget about, Fisher's Island, which is only 2 miles off the Connecticut-Rhode Island mainland. But I got to do a river otter survey over there because I suspected that the one river otter that I documented over the course of a year that was in the Green Porch Shelter Island area might have come over from Fisher's Island. And sure enough, I actually, in 2012, I found more otter latrines on Fisher's Island than I found on Long Island in 2008. Otters were totally saturated on the island. So that means that any otters that, any yearlings that have to disperse, some might be able to stay on the island as some of the older otters die of old age, but most of the young are going to have to take to the water and disperse off of Fishers. And they're excellent swimmers, but in the literature, using radio telemetry studies, the longest open water crossing documented was about 5 miles. It's just a little bit longer than Fisher's Island to Great Gull. And then from Great Gull to Plum and Plum to Orient is well within that 5 mile range. So otters can swim 7 miles an hour, and this widest point, this widest point across Long Island Sound is only 21 miles. So that's a 3-hour swim. We suspect that because otters' eyesight is somewhat adapted to seeing underwater to catch fish, that they're nearsighted, and it would be, and they might have a tough time detecting a landmass that's more than 5-6 miles away on the horizon. But they're very capable of making longer swims. Okay, so you know, we're still in the middle of this study, and but that's really interesting. I mean, basically, all the mink that have been documented on iNaturalist are not on Long Island. They're on Fisher's Island. This is our weasel species. There's 3 weasel species in New York State. This is the largest one, the long-tail weasel. And they're a little tricky to identify the species. The long-tail weasel, there's sexual dimorphism, meaning the male and the female are really different in size. And there's a little bit of overlap with the largest short-tail weasel and the smallest long-tail weasel. Now, I have found these since 1988 when I moved out here. But both were roadkills, and they were both near landfills. So they must have been hunting the rodents, that like rats that live around the roadkills. I mean the landfills. We do have one image of a long-tailed weasel so far in the survey. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, Connor points out that because Long Island is coastal and insular and was heavily settled back in the 1600s, most of the large wild animals were quickly exterminated. And also, it's a challenge for mammals to recolonize if they're inadvertently extirpated from the island today. So that's something to keep in mind. So what was we used to have wolves. He's talking about wolves, bobcat, possibly black bears. And as far as we know, there were no mountain lions on Long Island. And as I said earlier, a lot of those species have made a comeback not far from Long Island on the mainland, but they're not here. And it would be tough for them to get here. The coyote is a whole different category. I'll get to that in a bit. Also, since Connor's publication, there have been a number of changes that we know about in terms of the distribution anyway, not so much the number of species, but the distribution. So chipmunk were not on Shelter Island in the 60s. And we actually know where they came from. There was a guy who lived on Shelter Island. He had a cabin up in the Catskills, and he really enjoyed the chipmunks scampering around on his property up there. And he trapped a couple and brought them and released them to Shelter Island. So they are all over Shelter Island today. The flying squirrel, this is a beautiful and fascinating animal, very small animal. This was not on the South Fork. Actually, it wasn't found on the East End, according to Connor. And but it was just over the Shinnecock Canal in Hampton Bays. I remember seeing them in Penny Pond area, so that's Red Creek Park. And you could see the big bulging eyes. That's an indication that it's a very nocturnal animal. And it's not very unsquirrel-like in its movements and behavior. It's very calm and, yeah, like I said, really cool animal. So these are, a lot of people don't even know they're in their neighborhood because they're so nocturnal. But a few people have noticed them at their bird feeders if they set up a trail cam to photograph stuff that's coming into the bird feeder. So they'll hit the bird feeders at night. They also, in the winter, get into your attic, and they all group together. You might have as many as 20 up in your attic, and you hear them running around. And how did they get over onto the East End? Well, I think nuisance trappers that were hired to get them out of people's attics, caught them, and then, okay, where am I going to let them go? They don't necessarily know that they're not on the East End. So they might've thought, oh, I'll let them go in, a nice nature preserve in Southampton town or in Bridgehampton and the Long Pond Greenbelt. And then, you start a new population. So we think they're already out to Montauk Point on the South Fork anyway. I know they've gotten past Amagansett. So that's something we wanted to document, the distribution of something like that. Okay, this is, so we have a group, the Long Island Coyote Study Group. We've been meeting for 4 or 5 years now. And we have an array of trail cameras out to document the colonization of Long Island by coyotes. And you can see that there's a big cluster in Nassau County and Queens. So the first breeding on Long Island has taken place, well, the very first by LaGuardia Airport. And that didn't end well. So they got in a little bit of trouble. There were 8 pups, and they were very close to the employee parking lot, and the LaGuardia Airport's 24/7. So there's shifts of people coming and going, and some people started tossing them food when they saw the pups at night, and they got a little too, they weren't wary of people, and the officials thought there was going to be a problem at some point. So they hired someone to come in and extirpate them. They got everyone but one coyote got away. So anyway, that didn't end well. We thought that's not a great start for the first breeding pair on Long Island. So we ramped up things, and we've documented now, I think we're up to 4 breeding pairs in this area here. So this is northwestern Nassau County. We suspect that there's a breeding pair in Cutchogue as well. we have photographs of a single coyote on the South Fork over the course of about 4 years, and then it disappeared. We think that, so the lesson here is coyotes they can disperse the whole length of Long Island. So a pup born in Nassau County might end up in Montauk. And we have to fill in a few gaps here with some more cameras. So Fire Island, there's some staff from Fire Island National Seashore that are tracking and keeping tabs on a lone coyote out there. It's been out there for a year now. So these trail cams are also documenting other mammals. So that's a good resource for us to use for the mammal survey. Yeah, okay, so our methodology is to get all of the natural resource agencies on Long Island. So we have like there's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at Wertheim and a couple other places. Federal agencies, there's New York State Parks, there's the New York State DEC, there's Suffolk County Parks, Suffolk County Office of Ecology, and down to the township level. A lot of at least the towns out on the East End, Southampton and East Hampton, they have really good natural resource departments. And then from organizing the Long Island Natural History Conference, now we just had our ninth conference. There's around 40 or 50 conservation organizations on Long Island. They could be as small as a group like yourself, ReWild Long Island, up to like the Nature Conservancy. So we want to get all those conservation organizations to sort of take on a site with a trail cam or two, depending on the size of the organization, and monitor a site for a couple of years. And you could set up your trail cam for say 2 months at one site, and then move it to another site so you get more coverage. And I also think that this would be a really good project, and I have had some responses from school teachers who would like to get involved. So I'm hoping that I can, it's on my to-do list this month, because they need to get that into a budget. So a trail cam and all the accessories runs about $300 to $350 for a good one. And just one trail cam could be used with one class for say 4 weeks. And then you could, take all of take the trail cam and hand it off to another class in the same school. And it could be used year in, year out if you get a good quality one. And a lot of schools are really close to very interesting spots to set up a trail cam. So, and the thing is, most of the kids will probably figure out all the technical issues with using a trail cam better than someone like myself. I think they'd really be fascinated with it, reviewing the images and trying to figure out what it is. Is that a squirrel or is that an opossum? So, and then there's lots of other resources we can use. There's some existing wildlife surveys. I mentioned nuisance trappers, great resource. Wildlife rehabilitators, another great resource. Yeah, I think we could do a bang-up job. So other than the trail cam work, which anybody could do, I mean, anybody that wants to invest in a trail cam, it's a BYO trail cam. Oh, there's one other group that I should mention that's got like, I don't know, 20,000 members. It's a Facebook group called Long Island Wildlife Photography. And they've gotten some unbelievable images of otters. And there is one guy there that's a school teacher who is really into the trail cams. And he's the one that has the long-tailed weasel, the only one I know of on Long Island right now. He's also gotten a bunch of skunk images. Anyway, this part of the study this is the stuff that you're not going to get on a trail cam, like the shrew. We have 2 shrew species. You're probably not going to get the voles. We have 2 vole species. We have several mice. I think it's 3 mice species. And the 2 ways you do that is this is called a Sherman trap. It's a live trap. You put bait in it, you set it out, and this is a hole in the ground that you dig, and you put a little bucket in, and things will fall in and they can't get out of the bucket. It's a little plastic bucket. It's called a pitfall trap. Now we can only do this. This requires some training. And you really can only do this during the summer months, because the shrews, for example, if it goes below 60 degrees at night, their metabolic rate is so high that there's a good chance that they're going to die in the trap. So we have to limit it to the summer months. We don't want to kill anything. And here are some of the things that you'll find in those traps. So up in the upper left here is a meadow vole. They actually thrive in the upper salt marsh. One of our most valuable species throughout North America in terms of the percentage of carnivores that and raptors that utilize this as a food source. It's a major food source for a lot of species. So we have the pine vole and the meadow vole, and we already covered the masked shrew. We also have the short-tailed shrew. The short-tailed shrew, actually, you find that often just laying dead in a trail with no marks on it. Coyotes and foxes will catch it and realize that it has a poisonous gland, and so they don't eat it. And the short-tailed shrew, it's much bigger than the smash shrew, and that's our most common shrew that you would counter. The other thing amazing about that is they have the saliva. The poison is also in a saliva gland, and they can catch things like a small meadow vole, like maybe a meadow vole that's only a week or 2 old. But it's bigger than it can be bigger than the short-tailed shrew, and they bite it, and the poison immobilizes it but doesn't kill it, and then they cache it. So it's alive, the heart is beating, and it's not decaying, but it can't move. It's paralyzed. And that's like their stockpile of food that they'll use later on. Okay, and then moving along to the lower left is, this is an animal I found in the walking dunes in January, and I've heard about it. I have never seen it, and I've never seen any of its sign. This is the jumping mouse, the meadow jumping mouse. And again, another really interesting, beautiful animal. That long tail and those huge feet. So this can make leaps of 6 feet or greater. The reason why you don't see it is it's very nocturnal, and it hibernates for 6 months of the year. So the reason why I found this one was we had a big storm in January, and I think its hibernating site, which could be as deep as 3 feet down in the soil, got flooded, and it made its way out, but it succumbed to the cold temperatures. And again, no mark on it, just dead. So it hibernates from like late October to early April. And then the last one up here is with 2 mole species. The eastern mole is the common one. This is the star-nosed mole. And you can see those big digging claws on the front feet. And, again, it doesn't use its eyesight so much as it uses other senses to detect prey like earthworms underground. Unfortunately, they take the rap for a lot of damage done in gardens by the vole with a V, being a vegetarian, eats a lot of your plants, including the roots, the underground roots from, say, like your favorite high bush blueberry plant, as it did in my backyard one winter. And the mole, with an M for meat eater, eats grubs and earthworms and things like that, and is very beneficial on your property in that sense. Some people have an issue with it making raised ridges in the lawn, and that's I don't find it unsightly, but I think it's a lot of us, and hopefully the ReWild group. I'm talking to the converted, but there's I sometimes refer to Long Island as Lawn Island. I mean, I grew up in Nassau County in North Belmore, and we got, I don't know, we got kind of brainwashed with this whole idea of the lawn, useless piece of vegetation. Anyway, I don't have a problem finding mole activity on my property, and hopefully we'll change that over time. So coyotes, these are the pups from the Northwest, the first breeding pair successful, where they didn't come in and kill the pups in Northwest Nassau County. By the way, if you didn't attend the Long Island Natural History Conference a couple weeks, 3 weeks ago, the sessions are all recorded, and I highly recommend that you at least look at Stephen Perot's presentation on following this group of coyotes for a year in Northwest Nassau County. Fascinating. He did a really good job, and it's just a half-an-hour presentation. Anyway, black tip tail, and there's no black behind the ears. Red fox is white tip tail, black behind the ears, and black socks that are very visible from the front, not too bad from the side, and not really visible from behind. I get a lot of images of red fox pups that people think are coyotes. And anyway, and here's the mom. So yeah, that's a newcomer. Now there's a lot of misinformation about coyotes. One is that the DEC brought coyotes to Long Island to deal with the deer problem here, and we do have a deer problem, and the coyote, unfortunately, is not going to solve that. So studies upstate did document that deer, based on collecting scat and analyzing the scat, deer are a major component of the coyote's diet. However, the following year, they put radio transmitters on the coyotes they were studying, and other than killing some fawns in June, for a very limited time period where they could catch the fawns without a lot of energy, all of the adult deer that were eaten were scavenged roadkills. Now think about it. There's no shortage of roadkill deer, unfortunately. And on Long Island, in my town, East Hampton, they put up signs every year. How many deer were killed? This is known roadkills that ended up on the pavement or on the side of the road, not the ones that got hit bad, made it off the road, and died in the woods a couple days later from internal bleeding. This is known found roadkills, between 400 and 500 every year in East Hampton town alone. So there's no need to go chase down a deer. They just, scavenge the ones that are already dead. And coyotes are pretty good swimmers, and they made it 2 miles over to Fisher's Island. And as breeding, at least one breeding pair on Fisher's Island. By the way, there's a whole presentation I can do on coyotes, but it's a fascinating animal. It's an animal that has kind of evolved in like 3 human generations as it made its way from the West, where its original range was in North America, and took advantage of an open ecological niche that was left by our war on wolves, and on its way across the north end, across the Great Lakes and into Canada, and then down into New York State, crossing the St. Lawrence River, made it to New York State sometime around the 1930s, 1940s. So my ecology professor at St. Lawrence University was studying them in the 1970s. And they was so much bigger than the Western coyote that they assumed that it had bred with domestic dogs. So they called it a coy dog. We didn't have the sophisticated genetic lab techniques to actually tease out all the DNA. But once we learned to do that more recently, found out that it actually bred with some coyotes where wolves, where the wolf population was really low because of bounties, and they just a chance encounter, and the young survived, the hybrid survived, and were able to breed as well. So just final thing on that, what we call now the Eastern coyote versus the Western coyote has 2/3 Western coyote genes, 1/4 wolf, and about 10% domestic dog. Oh, and Long Island is the last significant landmass in North America that hasn't been colonized by coyotes, and it's happening as we speak. So raccoons. So the coyote, the raccoon, and the red fox are all what we call mesopredators, M-E-S-O predators. And we don't have any apex predators that are strictly terrestrial on Long Island. That would be the wolf and the bobcat for this area. We have sharks in the water as an apex predator, and we have the river otters, an apex predator. So in other words, nothing really messes with them. They're top of the food chain. So what's one of the things that I don't really think is a very good reflection of our ecosystem here on Long Island is that the raccoon numbers are huge, and they go through a boom-bust cycle. Every once in a while, you're out in the field and you see dead raccoons all over the place. Or you see raccoons that are just walking around in circles in broad daylight. This is a fairly nocturnal species. I got this photo at a river otter site up at Shoe Swamp, Oyster Bay area. And the red fox goes through a similar situation that I'll get to in a minute. But we're hoping that the coyote, even though that's not an apex predator, it's territorial and it's bigger than the raccoon. We're hoping that when that sets up territories as it expands on Long Island, unlike the otters, they're territorial. They'll mark the territory, keep out. They're going to squeeze the raccoons into smaller spaces. And the population should level out at a lower number so they don't get that density-dependent disease, canine distemper, where it runs through the population and there's dead raccoons all over the place. I think that's a good thing. And here's some photos while I was out doing an otter survey in Connecticut State Park. They're just dead raccoons all over the place. And the red fox has a similar thing that more people are aware of. Before I get into that, though, a couple key features: black behind the ears. This is a winter coat. The summer coat is much different looking and makes them look more lean. But it's just the length of the fur. Black on the lower legs, mostly in the front and on the sides a little bit. And then you have the white tip tail. That's usually you could see that from all angles. This was taken at Sunken Meadow, again at a river otter site. So the red fox numbers, you see red foxes everywhere, and then they get that density dependent disease. It's a skin mite, sarcoptic mange. It's a mite. Now they don't die from that, but it taxes their immune system, and they lose a lot of fur. I mean, their tail sometimes looks like a piece of rope or a wire, and it's hard to recognize them as a fox sometimes if they have it really to an extreme extent. And they then succumb to other diseases that they would normally fend off. So it's a big die off, and then you don't see any foxes, or not many foxes, for a few years, and then their population starts rebuilding again. So again, fox isn't going to want to tangle with a coyote. Coyote's in a bigger weight class, so to speak, and it's going to avoid those coyote territories. So it's going to be squeezed out, and we're not going to get that boom and bust cycles, I don't think. But that's something that the Long Island Coyote Study Group wants to track. Interesting, be an interesting study. And we had many years ago, our common cottontail was the New England cottontail, which is now listed as either threatened, rare, or endangered, depending on the state. That has been replaced on Long Island by the more common eastern cottontail, and throughout its range. So all throughout New England, it's been kind of replaced by eastern cottontail. But it's hanging on in a few places, and there's a study. Rhode Island is some habitat, and Cape Cod. And I was listening to a radio broadcast by the biologist that was studying them up in Cape Cod, and he's describing the habitat. Sounded just like Montauk. And the DEC has claimed that they did study whether or not we had any New England cottontails left on Long Island, but I have not seen a report on that. So just like that study they was supposed to do with the federal grant on those fur bearers back in 2012, that 5-year study, there's no report that I could find. So I'm pushing for us to, you can't tell them apart in the field. Now, these two look completely different in some ways, but there's a lot of shading differences between in both species. So you can't tell them apart in the field. In fact, you can't really tell them apart when you have them in hand. But if you collect fresh scat, which is easy to find and easy to collect, and you run it over to a lab for genetic testing, they have like a 90%, 95% accuracy of getting the exact species down. And that would be simple to do. So we did collect our first scat already and sent it off, waiting for results. And I just threw this in at the end because who knows? I mean, the fisher, another valuable fur bearer that was wiped out in large areas of its range in North America. And when I was studying with one of my mentors in southern New Hampshire, 1983, fishers had just made a comeback, and they from the north they moved down and were distributed throughout New Hampshire, including right up to the Massachusetts border. And he had never seen one before. He was in his mid-70s when I was working with him, and incredible naturalist and wildlife biologist, and it was the first fisher he'd ever seen. So this has now been photographed in the Bronx, and with all of the rats in New York City. So fishers are really good at dealing with porcupines. They grab the nose of porcupines and flip them over, but they're really good tree climbers, and they also one of their main prey is also squirrels. So New York City has a lot of rats, a lot of squirrels. You never know, might make its way over here someday. So in closing, in terms of rewilding, there's some encouraging news. We have coyotes, we have river otters making a comeback. We have a beaver. We've had a beaver in East Hampton for a couple of years. It didn't have a mate. I just found another beaver lodge out of Montauk just a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if there's a pair. I haven't determined that yet. There were beaver on Staten Island, as well as coyotes. So kind of interesting. Interesting time to be tracking changes in our wildlife. So I think that is it. Yes. So I can stop sharing, and we could do some questions if you have any questions.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike. That was so totally amazing. Fabulous info and pictures, while other people come up with questions. Oh, here, Leonard is asking, what happened to the East Hampton beaver?
Oh, so what happened, unfortunately, it had a lodge in Scoy Pond and the Graces State Preserve. Really out of the way. It really wasn't messing, it wasn't flooding anybody's property. It picked the perfect spot. And someone took it upon themselves to tear apart the lodge. I mean, talk about some work. And so it set up a smaller lodge in the same pond, abandoned that lodge, and then they ripped that apart, and then it left and it wandered around. It ended up about 10 miles to the east in Hither Hills State Park, and lived, well, you know, an interesting thing about beaver is they don't leave as yearlings. They stay with their parents for 2 years. So they help out with the next litter. The theory is that they have a lot to learn. So there's learning behavior, and then there's instinct. That's the theory anyway, that they learn how to do a dam and maintain a dam and get their winter cash in and build a good lodge. So they stay with their parents for 2 years, and then they disperse. So they're already 3 years old usually when they find their own little spot to settle down. And their lifespan is, I think it's 9 years. So yeah, it was in the East Hampton area for like 5 or 6 years. We have photos of it when it was very healthy looking. The fur looked great. It was fat. And then we got photos of it when it left Hither Hills. We assume it realized it was now or never in terms of passing its genes on. So looking for a mate. And we have a photo of it crossing one of the roads in Amagansett, and it looked bad. It was all bony. The fur was matted. And we assume it just died of old age. It was about 9 years old. So and I don't have any information on the one that I just documented 2 weeks ago.
Nancy is asking, can we join the iNaturalist project? There is a link to it here in the chat. Here's where you can learn more about and join the mammal survey.
Yeah.
Yep. Great.
So there's a lot of information right on that link, and then that you can access a bunch of Zooms. There's one by Janet Pesataro, who is the author of a book on using trail cams to do wildlife studies. Really great information. There's Ariel Santos from Seatuck at the conference did a half-hour talk on the project, and then also how to deal with you get the app and go on, use your cell phone to record stuff.
Great. The link to the conference is also in the chat. So if people want to grab it there, that's great.
Yeah. And and there's a couple other little things in there. So yeah, we'd love to have you guys on board. And if you do want to get involved, even if it's for monitoring a trail cam for like, a short-term thing in your favorite spot. One thing is you really should get the permission of the landowner, like if it's a state park or something. You just want to give them a heads up.
You had mentioned that there are a lot of interesting spots around for trail cams. How do we identify that? Do we contact you?
Actually, Janet goes over that. So you want to look for, first of all, you don't want to be on a marked trail in a park. You don't want to get a lot of images of people, and that's going to disturb people. You also run the risk of vandalism. So you want to go off the beaten path. And you might want to try like one area, like a nice woodland area for 2 months, and then move your camera for 2 months to like the edge of a pond or a stream or something like that for a little variety. But what you want to do is you want to look for wildlife sign. And what you'll see is if you go off the hiking trails, you want to look for a game trail. And you could pick those out even in the wintertime. You can actually see. And like the obvious ones are deer trails. They're really narrow, but you can discern those in the woods. And then a lot of other things, they don't want to go bushwhacking and make a lot of noise going through the huckleberry and lowbush blueberry. They're going to use the deer trail as well. So foxes will use it. The only thing that might not use it would be rabbits, but rabbits, the sign for rabbits is easy to find too. Actually, the dunes is not a bad spot as well, like the back of the primary dune, that dune heath area. You get a lot of things moving around there, and you can look for the tracks.
That's very cool. What do you find in a dune that you wouldn't find in the woods?
Well, when I first got here from graduate school, I was kind of surprised that the cottontail rabbits were using the back dune area. It's pretty much, heather and mats of, what's that plant that's also bearberry. And they actually will eat the beach grass. You can see their, diagonal cuttings in the beach grass, which has got a lot of silica in it. It's something you wouldn't think would be very palatable to them, but they're very common. And foxes, of course, roam around in there, and raccoons. Yeah, you'll find a lot of different things in there. Of course, deer are everywhere, but
Actually, that comes to the next question here in the chat from Len. Dear, what are some of the ecological consequences of overpopulation?
The main one that we're concerned about is the impact of deer browsing on the forest understory. So that's like all ecosystems have layers or zones. And the most obvious ecosystem that you can see that right away is the salt marsh. You've got the low intertidal with the Spartina altiniflora that gets flooded daily, and then you get the Spartina patens that's further up, and that's flooded, like once or twice a month with the new moon and the full moon tides. And then you have the groundsel bush and the marsh elder shrub zone, and then you have the upland forest. But all ecosystems have those kind of zones, and in the forest, it's the canopy, the understory, which are trees, smaller trees like flowering dogwood, sassafras might be spice bush. But then you get down near the ground, and you've got that knee-high mat of stuff. Mostly huckleberry, lowbush blueberry, but there's a lot of different things in there. And things like whippoorwills and ovenbirds, there's a lot of box turtles. They all utilize that forest understory shrub layer. And that's getting wiped out by the deer. So now you drive around a lot of places in East Hampton now, you see the mature trees, and then you see the leaf litter, and that's it. There's really no habitat for a lot of those ground nesting birds. So, big problem.
Yep. Thank you. I guess one more question from Georgina. What types of interesting larger mammals have been documented at Comset State Park?
Let's see. I'd have to look at the iNaturalist map, but I know that there's otters using that waterway just south of Comset. It's a long cove. And we have a lot of video and still images of otters in that area. So they're probably, well, Comset only has that one pond up by the sound that I know of, but they're in that area, that general area. And then I'm sure there's foxes up in that area. I would be surprised if there weren't. So then the two mesopredators, common mesopredators, are fox and red fox and raccoon.
Sort of a two-part question. What are the most important things we can do as individuals to help Long Island's mammals? And also, a lot of people will say, oh, I've got moles or voles. Now I know what the difference is between the two of them, or I've got squirrels in my attic or something, and I'm going to call a trapper. How do we guide them towards an ethical or responsible trapper? So that's a two-part question of how can we protect Long Island's mammals?
Right. Let's see. I mean, I think a group like yourself could do that. There's, I can't remember the number of how many people live on Long Island. It's, in the millions, right? And, I do all these talks and I go around to different groups. Mostly I get asked to present at things like the last talk I had was Bayard Cutting Arboretum, that crew. So there's already like kind of an interest in nature. And there's so much more we could do with education, just an awareness of what we have. And like the the mole and some of these other things. Okay, yeah, you don't want to have flying squirrels in your attic, but there are ways to get them out of your attic without killing them. And they go out every night, so you can make a one-way funnel. If you have to figure out where they're getting in, 9 times out of 10, they're getting in through that ridiculous vent that's in the attic. It's up in the gable end of the house, and it has screen behind it. And the screen is great for bugs and bees and flies and things, but you could just put your finger through the screen, you know, and it doesn't keep the squirrels out. And those flying squirrels they're tiny. They can get right in there. So putting some hardware cloth up keeps them out. But to get them out, you do a one-way exit thing with some hardware cloth. It's not that tricky to do. And I would just ask the wildlife nuisance trapper if he knows how to do that without killing them. And then the other stuff is, again, you know, okay, so I think the mantra should be, I own a piece of Long Island. And even though it might be like 1/8 of an acre, it's a piece of Long Island. And it's up to me to steward it in a responsible manner, because the cumulative impact of a whole bunch of people in a neighborhood putting out decon because they don't like the fact that there's mice living in the yard, you know, it's one thing to have them in your house. It's another thing, you know, what's the problem with them being on your property? And the same thing with the moles. You know, there's all these mole exterminator things. Well, all these poisons, they don't stop at killing the rats and the voles and the mice. Other things are going to scavenge them. And you know, there's a lot of hawks and owls that die because of the amount of rat poison that's put out in people's yards. And the other issue that, you know, we need to make sure everybody understands is, you know, you hire someone to do this, they're going to do it. They're not going to tell you exactly, you know, oh, we use organic, you know, pesticides, you know, well, it's still a pesticide. And by the way, anybody that doesn't know that there's no such thing as a tick pesticide or a mosquito pesticide, no, there's no such thing. No, you're killing everything it comes in contact with, and basically only things that the pesticide comes in contact with. So the day after you treat your property, a deer walks through with an engorged tick, it drops off and it lays eggs. Guess what? You know, you're going to have ticks on your property. Some people, you know, okay, you want to be a steward, you have to get yourself educated. Don't trust the salesman to tell you that, oh, we're just spraying for ticks. No, that's not happening. All the pollinators are going to get killed. You growing tomatoes in the backyard, you know, you don't want to be spraying that stuff. I'm very discouraged that people don't understand that. I mean, come on. And at least where I am out on the East End, we have wells. We're on wells. So, you know, you're spraying your lawn with some of this stuff, it's going to get in the water table, and that's what we're drinking. And why? Why? It's crazy. You know, you just have to be, you know, the tick thing and Lyme disease is something you have to be really careful about. But you know, spraying your property you still got to keep your guard up. It doesn't. Now there are some good things that have been developed by ecologists, like the Daminex tubes that you put out. It's not broadcast spraying. It's designed to attract the mice, and that's a main vector, and the moles, and they use it for nesting material, and they've shown that you can make a dent in them. So, but you have to, again, you can't just get into this thing. You're trusting someone who's in the business of spraying, and you write the check. You need to do your homework and make sure it's appropriate.
And ultimately that it's safe for you and your family.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Mike, thank you so much. That was a brilliant talk, and what an eloquent coda here too. Thank you so very much.
You bet. You
I
bet.
really appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge.
Sure. Yeah, and yeah, I hope to some of you can get involved and help us out, even if it's, you know, every little bit helps for the Long Island Mammal Survey. Every little bit helps, and you know, you could just take even roadkills are good to report to us, you know, so we could fill in the maps. So this summer we're going to be taking a first stab at all the data we have, and we're going to be making maps of each species. And at the end of, by next fall, we'll know where we need to like fill in the gaps.
Just amazing. Thank you. Thank you so very much.
You bet. Have a good night, everyone.